Welcome to Infidelity Tales. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel and liking this video. It only takes a moment, but it encourages us to create more meaningful stories, so please give it a thumbs up. Now let's begin the story. I never imagined I would end up in a situation like this. I grew up in a small town, dreaming of a peaceful and happy life. I married my college sweetheart, Adam, when we were both young and filled with hope. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And at the time that felt like enough. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs, but at the time I couldn't have predicted what was coming. I first met Mr. Thompson, our landlord, when Adam and I moved into the small house we were renting. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours. It had a bit of charm, a cozy little garden and a small backyard I absolutely loved. Adam and I were excited to start this new chapter in our lives. Mr. Thompson was an older man, probably in his early 60s. He had a warm face and was always smiling when we saw him. He was the kind of landlord who would stop by now and then to check if everything was fine with the house. I remember the first time he came over to repair a broken fence. He was very polite, asking if we needed anything and chatting casually about how the neighborhood had changed over the years. Back then I didn't think much of it. He just seemed like a friendly older man. But over time things began to shift. Adam's job started requiring him to travel more, which meant I was spending more time alone at home. It was during those moments that I began to notice Mr. Thompson differently. He started dropping by without warning, sometimes to check on the house, other times just to talk. First, I believed it was harmless. After all, he was our landlord. But as the visits became more frequent, I sensed something was changing in the way he spoke to me. One afternoon, I was tending to the garden when Mr. Thompson came over again. He had been visiting more often lately, and although I didn't mind the company, something about his presence began to feel strange. He was still kind, but there was a subtle intensity in the way he looked at me, in the way he spoke, that made me feel uncomfortable. That afternoon, he stayed longer than usual. We talked about the weather, the garden, and eventually deeper things about life itself. It was in those moments I started to sense a different kind of attention in his behavior. "Are you happy here?" he asked, looking at me in a way that felt too personal. I didn't know how to respond. Of course I loved Adam, but lately I had been feeling a growing distance between us, especially with how often he was away for work. I felt lonely even when Adam was at home, but I couldn't bring myself to say that to Mr. Thompson. Not out loud. I smiled and nodded, trying to push the thought aside. But Mr. Thompson didn't let it go. "Sometimes," he said, "it's easy to forget how important it is to have someone who really listens, someone to talk to." I couldn't explain why, but the way he said it gave me chills. His words stayed in my mind long after he left. I tried to convince myself it was just a harmless conversation. But the more he came around, the more I began to notice subtle changes in his behavior. His compliments, which once seemed innocent, started to carry a different tone. He would mention how nice I looked, how well I kept myself up, or how beautifully I maintained the house. First I thought he was simply being kind. But over time it felt like he was noticing things no one else did. One evening, while Adam was away on a business trip, I was curled up on the couch with a book. It was a quiet night, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Then the doorbell rang. I paused for a moment, unsure whether to answer. When I opened the door, there was Mr. Thompson, smiling. "I was just in the neighborhood," he said casually. "Thought I'd stop by to check if everything's all right." I smiled politely and stepped back to let him in. By now, it had become somewhat normal for him to visit without warning, so I didn't think much of it. He walked into the living room and we started chatting like usual. But something felt different this time. There was a strange tension in the air. Something in the way he looked at me made me uneasy. It wasn't anything obvious, just a lingering gaze. But it was enough to make my heart beat faster. As we continued talking, Mr. Thompson sat closer than usual. I could feel the space between us shrinking. His presence felt heavier than before. I laughed nervously at something he said, trying to shake off the growing discomfort in my chest. I kept telling myself he was just being friendly, that I was imagining things. But then, as if he sensed my unease, Mr. Thompson leaned in slightly and placed his hand gently on the arm of the couch. "You know," he said softly, "it's rare to find someone like you. Someone who truly listens, who genuinely cares." The words sounded innocent, but there was something in his tone, something about the way he said them, that made my skin crawl. I wanted to pull away, to tell him I was uncomfortable. But I didn't. Instead, I laughed quietly and tucked my legs up to my chest, trying to create some distance between us, even if it was just physical. Mr. Thompson noticed the change in my posture. For a moment, silence filled the room. He looked at me, his eyes gentle, but there was a sharpness behind them that I couldn't ignore. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said in a quiet voice. "I just wanted you to know you're appreciated. You're a very special person, Sarah." The way he said my name made my breath catch. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. Felt like I was frozen in place, stuck in that moment. Before I could speak, Mr. Thompson stood up. "Well, I should let you get back to your evening," he said, smiling again. But this time, his smile felt different. There was something unusual in it, something I couldn't quite understand. "Just wanted to check in and make sure you're okay." I nodded, my throat dry, and watched silently as he walked out of the house. When the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a deep breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I sat there, staring at the door for what felt like forever, trying to process what had just happened. I had never felt so conflicted in my life. Part of me wanted to tell Adam everything that had been going on, but another part of me felt too ashamed, too afraid of what he might think. I didn't want to create problems. I didn't want to make Adam doubt me, or worse, make him angry. Still, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore how Mr. Thompson was making me feel. It wasn't right, and I didn't want to encourage it. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that his visits weren't as innocent as they seemed. It felt like he had another reason for coming by, something he wasn't saying. What was I supposed to do? As the days went on, Mr. Thompson's visits became more frequent. And every time he showed up, I felt that same uncomfortable feeling, the unease growing stronger each time. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just overthinking. But the truth was, I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something about him that made my heart race, and not in a good way. I knew I had to be cautious. I couldn't let things go too far. But deep down, I also knew something was changing between us. I just didn't understand how serious it might become. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only continued to build. I still hadn't told Adam about the strange way Mr. Thompson had been acting. Part of me was scared he wouldn't believe me, or worse, that he'd be upset with me. After all, I kept telling myself I was just being polite. It was only small talk, nothing more, right? That's what I repeated in my head every time Mr. Thompson came by without warning, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. That uncomfortable feeling wasn't going away. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at me. The way he had rested his hand on the armrest of the couch, as if he was trying to create a connection. And it wasn't the kind of connection a landlord should have with a tenant. I found myself replaying the moment over and over in my mind. Each time I thought about it, the tension inside me grew. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, and I was alone in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Normally, I enjoyed cooking, it helped me relax. But that night it felt like a task I had to get through. My thoughts were elsewhere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. I had just started seasoning the chicken when I heard the familiar sound of the doorbell. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced out the kitchen window, and there he was, Mr. Thompson, standing at the front door, wearing his usual warm smile. I hadn't seen him in a couple of days. You'd think I'd feel relieved, but instead, a tight knot formed in my stomach. I wiped my hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. "Good evening, Sarah," Mr. Thompson said cheerfully as I opened it. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, not at all," I replied, forcing a smile. I stepped aside to let him in, and he entered as if it were completely normal. His eyes briefly scanned the kitchen, where I had been preparing dinner. "Smells wonderful in here," he said, his gaze lingering on the food. "You're quite the cook." I nodded politely, unsure how to respond. "It's just something simple, nothing special." "You always say that," he chuckled. "But you have a way of making even simple things feel special." His compliment was kind, but it didn't feel like a regular compliment anymore. Not like the ones I'd get from friends or even from Adam. There was a heaviness to his words, as if he was noticing more than just dinner or the clean house. I felt a wave of discomfort building again, but I tried to shake it off. "Thank you," I said softly. "Did you stop by to check on something?" Mr. Thompson's expression shifted slightly. He paused before replying. "Well, actually, I was hoping we could talk for a moment. It's been a while since we had a proper conversation." I was surprised. He had always made small talk when he visited, but this sounded more serious. I felt a flicker of anxiety, but I nodded. "Sure, we can sit down." I led him to the living room and pointed to the couch. I sat in my usual chair, the one I used when Adam and I watched TV together. There was a short silence before Mr. Thompson finally spoke. His tone was more serious than I'd ever heard it before. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about life lately, about how things change over time. It's easy to get caught up in the routine and forget what truly matters." I didn't know where he was going with this. "I know what you mean," I said carefully. "Life does get busy. It's easy to lose track of what's important." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "Exactly. But sometimes we need to pause and ask ourselves if we're really living, or just going through the motions." Something about his words made me uncomfortable, though I wasn't sure why yet. Then he leaned forward just a bit and said softly, "Sarah, I don't know how to explain this, but ever since I met you, I've felt a connection. Something special. It's hard to ignore." My breath caught in my throat. "I think about our conversations. The way you carry yourself. You're an incredible woman, and it's hard to express how much I admire you." His words sounded more like a confession than a compliment. My heart started racing. This wasn't the kind of attention I wanted. I suddenly felt trapped, unsure what to say. I don't know what to say," I murmured. "I appreciate the kind words, Mr. Thompson, but I'm married. I love my husband very much." He didn't look surprised or hurt. He simply leaned back and studied me quietly, his expression unreadable. "I understand," he said gently. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, Sarah. But I also don't want to pretend I don't feel what I feel." His honesty hit me hard. I had heard him compliment me before, but this time there was something deeper in his gaze. Something too intense. Fear and confusion rushed through me. This isn't just a friendly visit anymore, I thought. This is something else entirely. Mr. Thompson continued. "I don't want to cause any trouble between you and your husband. But I couldn't keep pretending. I had to let you know." I was speechless. I didn't want to be harsh or hurtful, but I also couldn't let him believe there was any chance of more between us. I finally took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Mr. Thompson," I said firmly, "I appreciate your honesty, but I need to be clear. I'm married, and I'm devoted to my husband. I'm not interested in anything more than a professional relationship with you. As our landlord." There was a long pause. I saw disappointment flicker in his eyes. He looked down at his hands and nodded slowly. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. That was never my intention." I nodded, a small wave of relief washing over me. The tension seemed to fade, but I knew something had changed. Things between us would never be the same again. His feelings weren't going to vanish, even if he didn't say them out loud. He stood up and I did too. "Thank you for listening," he said softly, his voice filled with sadness. "I'll leave you to your evening. Please know I respect your boundaries, Sarah." I just needed to say how I felt. I forced a small smile, still feeling uneasy inside. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I said. "I'll see you around." As he walked out the door, I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where Mr. Thompson had just been. My thoughts were spinning. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I was married to Adam, and yet I had just had that conversation with our landlord. What was going on? Why did it feel like my world was slowly coming apart? I shook my head, trying to clear the doubt. I needed to focus on my life with Adam, to remember the love and commitment we shared. But deep down, a small voice kept telling me that this wasn't over. After that day, I tried to block out the conversation with Mr. Thompson. I didn't want it to affect my relationship with Adam, and I definitely didn't want things to become even more complicated with our landlord. But even though I pushed the feelings away, they didn't disappear. The guilt and confusion stayed with me, and I kept questioning the way I had handled it. A few days later, Mr. Thompson showed up again, unannounced. My chest tightened as soon as I heard the doorbell. I wasn't ready for another awkward moment, but I knew I had to deal with it. I opened the door and tried to stay calm. "Hello, Sarah," he said. His voice still warm but more careful this time. "I just wanted to check in, make sure everything's still good with the house." I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Everything's fine, Mr. Thompson. Thanks for checking." He paused, clearly thinking about what to say next. "I've been thinking about what I said last time," he began. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I respect your boundaries. I just felt I needed to be honest and not leave things unspoken." I looked at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything. This time I had to be firm. There was no room for doubt. "Thank you for understanding," I said clearly. "But I want to be honest with you too. I'm married, and my focus is on my relationship with Adam. I can't allow anything to distract from that. I value our landlord-tenant relationship, but that's where it ends." His face softened, though I could still see sadness in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said gently. "And I'm sorry if I crossed a line." I took a deep breath, finally feeling some relief. "It's okay. I just needed to make sure we're both clear." He gave a respectful nod and turned to leave. I stood in the doorway, watching him walk away, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt sad that things had to end this way, but another part felt grateful. I had finally drawn the line I needed to. That evening, Adam and I sat down for dinner. For the first time in a while, I felt fully present. The weight of the past few weeks still hung in the air, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I needed to focus on what truly mattered: my family, my commitment to Adam, and the love we had built together. "Everything okay?" Adam asked, noticing I was a little quieter than usual. I smiled softly, trying to push the leftover thoughts out of my head. "Yeah, just thinking," I said. "It's really good to have you home." He smiled back and gently squeezed my hand. "It's good to be home." And in that moment, I realized something important. No matter how confusing life or emotions could be, my priority was clear. I had to protect my marriage. I couldn't let anyone or anything come between us. And I knew whatever came next, we'd face it together.